All right, I'm going to start then. Hello, everybody. Welcome back from the break. People like jokes. I like jokes. All right, let's test how we've recovered from our carb loading at lunch. Knock, knock. A new kind of port knocking. That's who. So one thing, I had to switch to my backup technology here. And so it's a little weird. I have to slide. If I'm a little off, somebody just pointed out. The slides aren't heavy. We'll get through it. If you were here last year, you know how I start. And it's not with jokes, my friends. If you're new, well, here we go. I start with questions to get us warmed up. This is going to be my question to you. And I'm going to select a couple people at random so you cannot hide. If you think I can't see you, I can. And I'll smell the fear like a good predator, and I'll call you out. Here's my question. I'll give you a second to think about it while I set the rest of my presentation up. What are empires built upon? Think about that. What are empires built upon? So what we're going to do today together is we're going to engage in a story. I'm going to tell you a story. I'm not going to tell you who I am. My name's Jason, by the way. That's all I'm going to tell you because I don't know what else matters. You can ask me any question you want at any time, and I'll answer. If you're curious about something, about me, about the presentation, about my thoughts on just about anything. But I'm going to tell you a story. When I was teaching at High Point University in High Point, not far up the road, I had a student come into my office one morning. And if anybody ever remembers what it was like to be in academia, whether you're on the faculty side or the student side, or like me, you ended up doing both over your career, some mornings are rougher than others. Some mornings are rougher than others. That's code for I had a hangover. So, everybody remember the question? What are empires built upon? My friend right here, as you took a drink, you knew it was coming. What do you think empires are built upon? First thing that pops in your mind. Emperors. That's a good answer. My friend right here in the glasses and the black shirt. Beer? Oh man, I'm thirsty. Fear and emperors, those go together, right? My man in the green. Ideals. Besides Raleigh, I'm going to tell you that empires are built upon the bones of those beside you. So I want us to look around to our left, to our right. These are our sisters and brothers and warriors who together as a community have the moral obligation to build the empire of cybersecurity together and secure the future. Are you with me? Skulls for the skull throne. Come on, it begged it. So here's the nature of the story. Anybody know who Raymond Chandler was? All right, you like old school, right? He's sitting with a hangover in his office. The girl comes in, oh, this bad thing happened. Raymond Chandler was the author of all that. Some of the best fiction ever written, I say, in the 20th century in America. And this was a Raymond Chandler type of morning. Again, I wasn't feeling at my best. And I'm here to tell you the truth. Sometimes, as much as I loved lecturing, as much as I loved presenting, I didn't really want to talk to anybody, especially on this Raymond Chandler morning. And I heard the door open up to the office suite. I was the only faculty in the office that morning. And I thought to myself, shit, here we go. And I heard the footsteps coming towards my office. And a little head poked in my door. And he had this floppy hair. I mean, he looked like a Muppet. Now, I can say that because we actually built this technology together, but he couldn't show up, so I can make fun of him all day, and he's not here to defend himself. His name's Kyle, one of the best students I've ever had in my life. And he said to me, is port knocking detectable? And I said, do you even network, bro? Now, who in here has ever heard of port knocking? Be honest. All right, a non-trivial amount of people. Of the people that raised their hands, have you ever used it? Either on your own systems, on a small office network, in a giant enterprise. Who's actually used it? One in the back, right there. 3. That cut like in a third. So of all the people that raised their hand that have ever heard of it, probably less than a third of you have actually used it. So the people that use it, do you still use it? A little bit? Okay, right on. He said to me, I know the OSI model. Now, if you've ever taught undergrads, when somebody says, I know the OSI model, my response is, well, then let's find out, because now you have my attention. Not something a sophomore undergrad usually knows. So a little bit about port knocking, because the majority of you didn't raise your hand. I'm going to assume maybe you've heard the word because I've said it like 10 times already, but you don't actually remember when it came out. It came out in 2005, 26, because it started with a really simple discussion on like a Usenet listserv type thread, which was, in a firewall rule, what is the difference between drop versus reject or deny, whatever the language is? Anybody know? That's right. And that reply often is like a combination of reset act, right? That is a big difference, because if you reject deny and you send that back, you're transmitting, which means by inference, my friends, what? That you're there and listening. If you just drop and just kick it in the trash, there's no reply, nobody knows you're there. What a revolutionary concept. And from there, some clever people said, hey, wait a minute. Hey, wait a minute. What if I write a service, a simple daemon, that interacts with a host firewall, that listens for incoming ports, drops them, but then does stuff like, who's there? Me, because I know the knock sequence. Oh man, that's really cool, isn't it? And it does work. It's a really simple concept because of that and one other thing. This is so paradigm shifting. We're used to connecting to a system, putting in a username and a password, hitting enter, and if it matches, it lets us in, right? We do that like 1,000 times a day. I feel like I do. This system says, no, if you know the secret knock, you're authenticated by inference. So once you knock correctly, I'm letting you in. That's a big paradigm shift. And so Kyle and I had this long conversation about, can you detect port knocking? And we published some research on it. We went on to do bigger and better things. He graduated and he's getting married, and I don't know what he's doing, but he ain't here this weekend. So now I can tell all kinds of crazy stories. The core principles of port knocking, when it came out in actual software, because it exists, there's a dozen or so forks of the main project. There's all kinds of versions. The core principle is concealment, not obfuscation. We're concealing via that drop, but we are actively listening for the knock sequence. And the idea is that instead of exposing something like SSH as a common form, I can conceal it because of that behavior. And if you know the knock, the service just opens up that port, and now you can connect. So think about that. That's a linear chain of events, right? Knock, and there's different forms of, do I knock once, do I knock twice, do I knock 3 times, 4? There's no limit. You can change it. You can build your own. I did. That's what I'm going to talk about for the next 40 minutes. And the authentication is baked into it. Really simple, elegant solution. That's empire building. Here's a cool little graphic. Isn't that the best art you've ever seen on a PowerPoint slide? Yeah. The client knocks once, twice, thrice. PKD, that's just some abstract version of a port knocking daemon, says, yeah, you knocked correctly. Those are the right ports. Because by the way, knocks are ports. So I just send a packet, it could be send flagged, super simple, to a destined port. So let's say 6,000, 7,000, 8,000. Why not? Let's just go in thousands in order. And when that's correct, the daemon says, hey, that's correct. Just open up SSH and now anybody can connect. Assuming that the only person that's going to be trying in that millisecond is the person that knocked. Is it detectable? Who thinks it's detectable? Yeah. Of course it is. Of course it is. It's not encrypted, and even if it were, it still has a header that has to be visible, right? And somehow you're getting to those ports. You can't totally hide that. Otherwise, then I guess it is obfuscated and I can't even see it. Like that back row back there. I need a visor, like a blackjack dealer. But there's two caveats, because now we got to be honest. Hypothetically, or in a lab environment, have you actually ever tried to detect port knocking? Has anybody actually ever tried it? In a lab? Were you able to detect it? Okay, me too. Check this out. Tell me if you agree or disagree with this then, because we're the only two in the room that have ever fucking done this experiment, right? Two caveats I'm gonna put on this. Tell me where I'm wrong. One, you have to be able to tap the traffic. Obviously, right? Because I'm gonna capture it. So how do you capture port knocking on the internet? Has anybody ever tapped an internet link that's gonna admit to it? Right? Okay, so that's one caveat. You agree with me, right, my friend? Thank you. Caveat two, that link cannot be super noisy. Because if it's super noisy, full of all kinds of traffic, how? There's just too much volume. Now, of course, we could build some advanced technology to parse that all out. Fair enough. If you're clean with Wireshark or TCP dump, you can build some filters, but how wrong am I? Thank you, my friend. So with that in mind, now we can step back and say, okay, look, we got a cool, elegant solution for concealed remote access that, although in practice and principle, it ought to be detectable, and it is, there's two caveats to that probably, like, you're not tapping the internet, and even if you could, it's probably too damn noisy, you ain't gonna see it. Okay, but let's say you can or can't, we'll put that aside. Are there any problems with it from a first principle? So think about this. Think about how I described this word. What do you think? What's wrong? What other vulnerabilities in the system are there? It'll alert a defender to you. If you're trying to brute force it. Yeah. And so on that, we can infer something. There's no client authentication. The authentication's baked into the port knockings, but I don't know who you are. Anybody that knows the knock can knock, right? I mean, anybody ever hide behind the couch when somebody knocks on the door and you know they're selling vacuums? Like, I don't want to talk to you, right? What else? Any other ideas? Yes. Yes. Great idea. How about this? What if I am able to capture the knock? We just inferred that it's not client authenticated. I can replay it. Right? I'm not checking like sequence numbers and deep packet inspections. I'm just looking for TCP ports. Ding, ding, ding. Okay, come on in. Okay. In fact, there are a trunk full of issues with port knocking if you're analyzing it in like a first principle way. Clearly, some of us, it hasn't stopped us from using it, right? And that's not bad. But then the question becomes, and this is part of the story of curiosity. We know it's detectable, at least in certain cases. We know it's an elegant, simple solution. It works. It works. For sure it works. But can we make it better? Can we do something or a set of things to at least negate some of these systemic issues? And yes, we can. Anybody ever try single packet authentication? Some people call it single packet authorization. It works pretty good too, isn't it? And it's basically just like one UDP packet, stateless, and you're good to go. That's a really simplified explanation, but I'm gonna get into it later because we baked it into ours. There are some deeper packet inspection schemes where they look at sequencing numbers in addition to the port knocks. Some people have tried some really slick stuff with cryptography using end-to-end encrypted, basically IPsec VPNs. But if you got that, why do you need this? That's kind of screwy. And now Koman, that's our solution. How cool is that? That's the baddest ass name of all time. I invented it. So here's the design. And I'm gonna tell you up front, I was originally gonna run a demo of this, but for my friends that have used port knocking or anything similar to that, it's super boring to watch. Like, it doesn't show you anything. Not like that cool SQL stuff. That was slick. That's a good demo. Or the Windows hacking, those are good demos. Watching code, yeah. So I'm gonna show you some code as I walk through this, but we started from a design. How do we design this from the ground up so that it doesn't have those issues, or at least not most of them, and we get something that's robust? First things first, it has to be functional, it has to work. And from the get-go, we designed this to be enterprise ready. not my home lab with like, my wife thinks I have 20 computers. I actually don't. I have like 22. I had 2 in the closet. She doesn't know about it. That's all right. It needs to be multi-user. That's the other thing with port knocking. If I want you to knock to my server and I want you to knock to my server, now do I let you both have the same knock? If I do, how do I tell the difference? Do I give you 2 different knocks? Now I got to run 2 daemons, 2 servers. See, that's why there's 2 in my closet. You got the joke. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Here's the other thing too, by the way, I didn't mention. This is important. When you knock, do you know what server you're knocking to? You assume, and fair play, right? It's probably yours, but you're still making an assumption. So there's no bidirectional authentication either. Back to this. We wanted this to be pseudo-anonymous because it's multi-user. And so when I show you client registration, I want to impress upon you that we have no way to know who somebody is. We only know that we registered them. Or when you register your friends and family and the community, cybersecurity, you don't have to know your name's John. I made that up. I hope it's not. I just know that you're in here and I have your keys. That's all I have to know about you. Pseudo-anonymous. Has to be resilient, and it needs to scale and be centrally managed. It's the 21st century. I'm not building and deploying software, even in my home environment for my own use, that isn't centrally managed. I'm not doing it anymore, dudes. I'm not doing it. So we have a design in principle. Now let's design the overarching algorithm of how it's going to work. First and foremost, we register clients. So there's a facility to do that. When we do that, we do a set of sub things. We generate 2 sets of keys, a symmetric key and a public key set. Okay? The next piece, assuming clients are registered, now the clients want to interact with the system. This is where our version of SPA comes in. Okay? We have we call a preamble. And so it's a 1-packet blip. When the software's in debug mode, it will send an ACK just so you know it's working. You can turn that off. And it's just a little blip that contains a unique hash fingerprint, the counter. I'll explain the counter in a second. And a little bit more information. And what that does is it triggers the system to say a registered client is getting ready to communicate with me. I'm going to set up the NOC system. And then how does the NOC system actually work? Here's the secret sauce, but it's not a secret anymore because I'm going to tell you about it. Okay? We use OTPs to generate the port sequences. There's no static ports in this system. They rotate every time a client sends this preamble successfully and the server recognizes them. Now, come on. You got to give me an applause for that, right? That's some fucking dark sorcery. Yeah! I think it was clever. It's an elegant riff off of it because that's one of the problems with port knocking. That's why you can replay it, because it's the same ports every time. So we thought to ourselves from first principles, well, how do you avoid that? You use an OTP, you just change it. Who cares? And then it's all IP tables after that. This is the implementation. There's 3 parts. 3 core parts. There's Koman server, and then Koman service. Really breaks down like this. The heart of all this is in Koman_server. That's the TCP/IP level daemon. That's what's listening for the preamble, for the ports that are the NOCs. It's what interacts with IP tables. That's the core. Koman is a command line interface to the server. So when you want to register clients, you can deregister clients, you can reset counters, you can revoke keys. If I have a traditional port knocking system and I let you connect, how do I kick you out? I mean, I could change the ports, but then it breaks it for everybody else too. In this system, everything's unique to each client. So I can revoke your access. I can revoke your keys. Okay, that seems pretty cool. And then Koman service goes with Koman. Anybody here familiar with Flask? Python Flask? That's a Python Flask stack. Here's why. Because we want to build a web admin panel for it, because I told you it's enterprise. That's why. As much as I love command line, I'm getting old, people. My hands are slow and brittle. So I like web. So that's not implemented, although it's there and it works. So Koman works through Koman service. They can interact with Koman server to get a list of clients, a list of keys, register, deregister, revoke, all that stuff. And then the Koman server does the heart of it. That all breaks down in the code into 2 parts. We call them the supporting cast. There's 3 crypto handlers, symmetric, asymmetric, and we need hashing. And then there's 8 utility handlers. These are the utilities like register clients, what we call the remote access sequences, fancy name for NOCs. They're just not NOCs anymore. Now it's a 15-digit hash-based OTP that gets broken down into 3 NOCs. That's also configurable because I told you it's enterprise. All enterprise software is configurable, right? And so you could change it to 1 NOC of 5 numbers. You could scale it all the way up to, well, I don't know, see how much you can take. And there's some other utility handlers in there. All right, I promised you code. By the way, if you like this code, because I think it's super sexy, I wrote it. If you think it's trash Python, Kyle wrote it. Easy way to tell. Another reason why I decided to show the code is because I also comment my code, and you can see in here we have some problems. You'll see in the comments that I've left myself little notes that, because this is beta, we have some things to fix. Some of you, who in here, this is your first conference ever? Anybody? Yeah, in the back, right? All right, I had a first day too, we all do. And I had no idea I would ever be up here showing this. I had no idea I could build software on this scale. Not on the first day, but now I'm on day, I don't know, what's 10 years times 365? A lot. Okay, that's just a time problem, right? So the other reason why I wanted to show the code with the comments, because this is in our repo, I'll give you the link to the GitHub at the end. Anybody can do this. This is why we're all brothers and sisters in the same community. You're capable of this if you want to do it and you put the time in. So anyway, back to pseudo-anonymous registration. We generate keys, asymmetric, symmetric. We look for some client IDs. This is really trick and clever. How do you think we build the client ID? Because that is unique per client. Close, good guess. It's not the OTP, it's the fingerprint of the key. Well, it's a public key system, so you need that for signing anyway. I'm not giving you anything if you're snooping. You could already derive that. Okay, cool. But it's unique to that key, which is by inference unique to the client. Last but not least, the counter. Here's why we keep a counter, because it is an OTP. And so your OTP based on your ID, which is a fingerprint that's unique to your keys, when it starts at 0, dictates which OTP gets generated. And then every time you start that process, the counter goes up. In the preamble negotiation, I'll share that in a second, we have a mechanism to check for that, because of course with OTPs you can get desynchronized. So we have the ability to resynchronize the counters. See, we thought of everything, didn't we? Who wants to pay me $1 million for this right now? I'll sell it. No takers? Okay. I haven't shown you all of it yet. Here's the preamble. We actually thought of this last. We built everything and it was kind of working and we're like, man, but something's not right, dude. There's some issues that we didn't cover from that trunk of issues. What are we gonna do? I'm like, well, why don't we get a preamble, right? When you knock, when you knock on my door, I say, who is it? And you're gonna say it's Frank. Now, if I know a Frank, which I do, and I hear your voice and you sound like Frank, I assume you're Frank. Or maybe I got a peephole I can look out, or both. That's kind of the concept of the preamble. So real simple, it's just the client ID. It's the rack sequence. So a remote access code is an individual NOC. All of them put together in one string is the sequence. And we send them all in a burst, okay? And then the current counter. The server checks that against its database of registration. It checks the counter for that client, and it generates an OTP to match it, to see if it matches. Pretty mature OTP. And then, like I said, in debug mode, we send an ACK just so you know. You can turn that off and it just gets dropped. You don't know anything. But the important part, last but not least, what this does is it sets in motion the interface to the IP tables. By the way, if you're curious, this is what it looks like when we generate the sequence. And so by default, this is set to 15 digits long. Do the math. That's 3 remote access codes of 5 digits each. Why 5 digits? Well, what's the maximum number of ports? 65,535. And so each sequence can range from 0 to the max. Each of the codes in the sequence. You can configure that. You can have it be 5 of those. You could have it be 1 of them if you're feeling spicy that day. I don't know. Maybe you want to try it. I did, it works. It worked. But that's important because of the space. That's an almost, I'm going to go out on the record and say, unbrute forceable space. And then here's the heart of it. What I'm showing you here is the last step. Is anybody familiar with IP chains and IP tables? Okay, I'll give you a quick breakdown. It's actually really cool technology built into it. You have a firewall, and the firewall has a list of rules and they're processed sequentially, right? And then in IP tables, this is Linux, you have different tables, one for forwarding, one for input, one for output, so you can filter on that table, and that's the direction of the traffic, right? You can put chains on those tables, and a chain is exactly what it says. It's a linked list, like a chain of links, right? And so the way this works, simplistically explaining it, is we set up a chain of subtables that represent the first remote access code, the second one, the third one, and then the fourth one, which is the SSH access. And those match the OTP. This is why the client has to send the preamble. That comes in, registration gets checked, if okay, generate that off that sequence. And now you're set. And so the NOC comes in, that's the sequence, server checks it, and then generates the chain. Client now sends the remote access code sequence in step, pass, SSH time. Quick aside, when we first did this, we were thinking about, well, we tried a package to interface with IP tables because it had a nice wrapper to it and gave you nice method exposure. This is all object-oriented. But man, it made it really hard to read the code and figure out what was going on. And because of the complexity and the space of possible remote access codes we have, it got tricky. And so I made the executive decision to say, screw it, let's just do sub-process calls and write the IP table commands just like you would if you were working from the command line. I don't think that's better code. I think it's more readable code, which makes it more maintainable. That was, to be transparent, the decision there. And there you go. By the way, real quick, with chains too, if you're not familiar, if you send the right first code with the wrong second one, you get kicked back to the first one. That's pretty cool, right? If you get to this one and something goes wrong, it'll kick you all the way back to the beginning. All the rules are also set with expiration timers. So this is only live for connection for the whole set. Remote access code, remote access code, remote access code, SSH, for, I think it's 30, 10, 10, 10 seconds. And that's it, then it's gone. Then you gotta resend the preamble. Our current status, I'm gonna call it beta. It's probably a strong alpha. There's a couple, 3 or 4 known bugs that we have to work out. To be honest with you, we took the summer off. We worked on this for 1.5 years. We actually have a patent on it too. And then we needed a break. He's getting married. I had other stuff to do. So we have known bugs, but it is usable. It does work. We have a lot of upcoming features for this. We have the web admin portal that we want to build just because why not? I like it. We agreed on it. Let's do it. We have a mobile app client that we're building for this that has everything baked into it. You just press the button and it handles it. And there's some other cool things we can build off of this because of the robustness and what I think of as enterprise ready. Not that I'm going to sell it to like IBM. I don't care. They can use it. It's open source, but it has some cool potential to it, including distributed swarming. That's really the idea for the clients, and that's why it had to be pseudo-anonymous. And there's the GitHub. So, who has questions? Anybody? Yes?
Have you looked at being able to tunnel arbitrary protocols?
We have. And there's no reason why you couldn't. Because we don't do anything funky in the stream. So think about like a TCP stream at transport and above. We don't even look at it. Because once the remote access codes come through and you get that last one, then you can connect to the system. And then now you're just connected to SSH like if it was open to begin with. Yes? No. So the question was, is it really intended for session protocols only? And really the way we design this is to be protocol agnostic. And so everything's configurable. So we have some exposure because it has to listen for the preamble on a designed port, right? Well, you can change that port and you can do anything with that. And it's single packet by nature. So that's not a big risk for us. And then whatever you want, if you wanted to do web instead of SSH, go for it. If you have a custom daemon you wrote, you want to put on some arbitrary port, who gives a shit? You just got to stick it in the config file and this will react to it. Does that answer your question? Oh, that's your question. Connection established. Yes. You would have to modify it from the configuration file to do that. I misunderstood what you meant, I think, the first time. Thank you for restating that. Anything else? Anybody in the back? Yes, my friend. It's clear. Yeah, you could. But because it's an OTP, you have like 30 seconds. Potentially, sure. Anybody else? Yes. Right. Sure. So basically what you're asking is what happens if in like a 3 remote access code sequence, I lose packet 2, right? Worst case scenario, you resynchronize. After 30 seconds, the rules would be expunged out anyway. And so it's reset. And then the client would just need to basically restart that initiation again. We thought about rigging up like some sub communication so that the client would know, because I think that's bad UX design. But now we already have a couple exposures. That's bad. I wouldn't do it, even though I want to. Good question. All right, I have a question for everybody else because I got a minute, right? Who in here now, compared to 40 minutes ago, is inspired to build something for yourself? Anybody? Who's going to go home? Yeah, right in the back. Do you have an idea what you want to build? I thought you were going to say a man in the middle for it. That'd be clever. And this is really the heart of it. I'm not going to sit up here, even though I make jokes about selling it. We have no intention of selling it. Everything we produce through that LLC he set up is open source by nature, and it's meant to be. Because we just want to drive our curiosity and build tools. We hope people use them. We use them. But that's really the spirit of it. And I think that's the spirit of this community. And I think that's how we build a secure future for us and everybody else. I really believe in that. All right, anything else? Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
It is. I'm going to put it right beside the first one, the stack of them. Thank you very much.